It was Halloween night a few years back. Yeah, I know, cliché timing for something creepy to happen, but I'll never forget how that night unfolded. I was working a late shift at a big shopping mall, about an hour away from home. The store closed at 10, but with cleanup and counting tills, I usually didn't leave until closer to 11. The last bus ran once an hour, so if I missed one, I'd be waiting around until midnight. And even when I caught it, it only dropped me about 2/3 of the way home, meaning I'd have to walk the last 20 minutes alone through quiet residential streets. That night was no different. It was cold, I was exhausted, and all I wanted was my bed. I caught the crowded bus just in time, crammed between people still wearing Halloween makeup and others half asleep on their phones. I threw my headphones in and stared out the window, tuning everything out. I didn't notice him, not when he got on, not at all during the ride. But he noticed me. When we finally reached my stop, I squeezed past the crowd and stepped into the cold air, relieved to be off. A few others got off too, and as usual, I started walking uphill toward my street. The road stretched on for a while. A line of closed shops and a few broken streetlights, with a grassy embankment on the other side that led up to houses. It always felt lonely after dark, but I'd walked it so many times that I didn't think twice about it. A few minutes in, I realized someone was walking behind me. Not unusual at first, plenty of people lived in the same area. But when we passed the first few side streets and he didn't turn off, something about it made me uneasy. The sound of his footsteps stayed steady, matching my pace. I reached the small medical clinic at the bottom of my hill and cut through the car park like I always did. It's a little shortcut that leads directly to the hill that goes up to my building. That's when I knew for sure. If he kept following me past that point, he wasn't just another person walking home. And he did. My stomach dropped. The road beyond that hill is dead quiet at night. No open shops, no bars, no late buses. My building's at the very top, surrounded by a metal fence and a small grassy slope leading to the entrance. Nobody who doesn't live there has any reason to go that way. I started walking faster, pretending not to notice him, but I could hear him speeding up too. The sound of his boots echoed behind me, and every hair on my body stood on end. I knew if I tried to unlock the gate and door now, he'd catch me before I got inside. So I crossed the street suddenly, walking behind a row of parked cars, and pulled my keys out of my bag. I waited for the right moment, when I heard his footsteps close in behind me, then bolted back across the road toward my building. I yanked open the gate and slammed it behind me as hard as I could. I didn't stop to see if it latched. I just ran. The slope down to the building was slick with rain, and I nearly slipped twice, but I managed to make it to the door. I slammed my keycard against the reader, pushed it open, and was halfway up the stairs when I heard it, the door flying open again. He was inside. I spun around and saw him coming toward me. Something in me snapped into survival mode. I swung my backpack hard into him. It hit his chest, and he stumbled backward, grabbing the railing to keep from falling. I screamed at him, "What the fuck are you doing?" My voice echoing off the concrete walls. Now that we were under the stairwell light, I finally got a proper look at him. He was older, maybe late 40s, with gray threading through his hair. He wore a dark, waxy coat and heavy boots, the kind meant for bad weather. His face was blank for a moment. Then he tried to look small, harmless, stammering something about visiting his son. I knew it was a lie. Nobody in my building matched that description. I yelled at him to get out, over and over, until I heard movement behind some of the doors. One of my neighbors cracked her door open on the ground floor, the chain still on, and called out, asking if I was okay. The man turned toward her, startled, and another neighbor opened his door further down the hall, demanding to know what was going on. "He followed me home," I shouted. "I don't know him. He won't leave." That seemed to do it. My male neighbor started yelling at him to get out, his voice louder and more forceful than mine. The man turned back to the door, fumbling with the handle. He clearly didn't know you had to press the release button to open it. That was all the proof I needed. He didn't live here. While he struggled, I ran the rest of the way up the stairs, got into my flat, and locked the door behind me. I dragged my vacuum cleaner in front of it. A stupid move, maybe, but it made me feel safer. I stayed awake most of the night, every little sound making me jump. At around 6 in the morning, I woke to the noise of voices and doors opening in the hallway. I peeked through the peephole and saw police officers checking the bin rooms and storage closets. One of my neighbors must have called them. I never asked what they found, and they never brought it up again. I've never seen that man again. I don't know what he wanted or how long he'd been watching me. Sometimes I still feel guilty for not calling the police myself. What if he's done it to someone else since then? But that night, all I wanted was to survive it and forget. I grew up in a small town that had one house everyone knew about during Halloween. Every year, the owners turned their place into something straight out of a professional haunted attraction. I'm not exaggerating. It was on another level. I think it was around 1999 or 2000, because I remember I was dressed as Darth Maul that year, complete with the double lightsaber I was ridiculously proud of. I'd been terrified of that house in past years, but I figured maybe if I looked scary enough, I'd finally have the guts to make it through. They had black tarps blocking off sections of the yard, strobes flashing from behind fake gravestones, and fog machines pumping out so much smoke it was hard to see where you were stepping. There were zombies bursting out of toilets, skeletons hanging from trees, and body parts scattered in the fake grass. Even though I was shaking half the time, I couldn't help but admire how much work must have gone into it all. It was gruesome, but it was perfect. The owners always sat on their porch watching the chaos, laughing and handing out candy while kids screamed and ran down the street. That was kind of the tradition. Everyone knew them and loved how far they went with it every Halloween. I remember slowly walking past the displays, clutching my plastic lightsaber, trying not to look scared even though my heart was pounding. Then, near the end of the setup, I noticed what they called the bottomless pit. It was basically a big box lit from inside, creating this strange illusion that looked like it went straight down into the earth. The light inside was dim and orange, almost like the glow from a dying fire, and it gave the whole area this eerie warmth that made everything around it look darker. I was staring at it, trying to figure out how they made it look so real, when I suddenly heard someone cough. Then a low, raspy voice said something like, "Hey, come here a second." I thought it was part of the show, maybe one of the homeowners trying to mess with me. I turned to my right and saw the open gate that led to the side of the house. It was dark over there, barely any light reaching past the fence, but after a few seconds I could make out the shape of someone standing still just beyond it. At first, I thought it was another prop. The guy wasn't moving at all, and I figured it was one of those realistic dummies they sometimes had hiding in the shadows to jump out at people later. But then the voice came again, rough and hoarse, and this time I knew it came from that shadow. "Hey kid," he said quietly, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. For some reason, I started to step closer. I think my brain was too overloaded to process anything properly. I'd just spent 10 minutes surrounded by fake monsters, so nothing felt real anymore. But as I got closer, the faint glow from the fake pit lit up part of his face. That's when I froze. He wasn't a prop. He wasn't part of the show. He was a real man, older, with a scruffy gray beard and greasy, unkempt hair. His clothes were ragged, like he'd been sleeping in them for days, and his teeth were this awful yellow when he smiled. That smile is burned into my memory even now. It didn't fit his face, didn't fit the moment. It just felt wrong, like something about it was off in a way my young brain couldn't explain. The second my mind registered that he didn't belong there, I screamed and took off running toward the exit. I didn't stop to look behind me, didn't care about the other kids staring. I just wanted to get back to my parents. When I reached them near the sidewalk, I was shaking and trying to explain what happened. One of the homeowners came over, concerned, and asked what was wrong. I told him, "There's an old man by the gate. He was talking to me." The homeowner frowned. "What man?" he asked. I just stared at him, trying to find the words, but all I could say was, "He was standing right there." He looked toward the side of the house, then back at me, clearly confused. A few other kids were walking through the yard, but none of them seemed to notice anything unusual. The man just shook his head slightly and told my parents he'd check it out. But even as he walked toward the gate, I could tell he didn't expect to find anyone there. They tried to reassure me, but I couldn't shake that feeling. The way the man's voice sounded, how still he was standing, and that strange, stretched-out smile that looked almost too wide. I never went back to that house again, even though everyone else still talked about how amazing their setup was every year. Now that I'm older, I sometimes think about that Halloween and how easily something horrifying can blend into something meant to be fun. Maybe he was just some random guy who wandered in, or maybe he was waiting for some kid to come close enough before anyone noticed him. I guess I'll never really know. This happened back in 2008, give or take a year. I'd just graduated high school and was still living at home with my parents, along with my younger brother and sister. My brother was in high school at the time, my sister in junior high. It was the night before Halloween, and the three of us were asleep in our rooms. Our neighborhood wasn't bad exactly, but the town we lived in definitely had its rough edges. Drug deals, gang activity, and the occasional sound of gunfire echoing a little too close for comfort. You got used to it after a while, though. It was home, even with the chaos. It must have been around 4 in the morning when I woke up to what sounded like a gunshot on our front porch. A split second later came the sound of someone pounding on the front door, hard enough to make the walls shake. Then came shouting, muffled at first, then clearer. I froze in bed for a few seconds, trying to figure out if I'd dreamed it. When it didn't stop, I got up and crept over to my window, which overlooked the front yard. From that angle, I could only see part of the porch, but I could definitely hear the yelling. I couldn't make out words, just this constant stream of angry noise and heavy pounding on the door that seemed to go on forever. After maybe 15 or 20 minutes, my brother burst into my room, out of breath and wide-eyed. "You okay?" he asked, and I just nodded, still trying to figure out what was happening. "What's going on?" I asked, and he told me everything. Apparently, some guy had shown up on our porch, banging on the door like a maniac. My dad, being braver than anyone I know, went downstairs to see what was happening. He looked through the glass panel on the door and saw a man standing there. When he asked what was wrong, the man kept saying, "They're after me," over and over, turning to look behind him as if someone was chasing him. The street outside was empty, just the dim yellow glow of the streetlights and a few parked cars. My dad, trying to stay calm, asked if he wanted to use the phone to call someone. The guy said yes, so my dad cracked the door just enough to hand him our house phone. But instead of taking it, the man lunged forward and tried to push his way inside. My dad slammed the door shut and locked it before he could get in. He called the police immediately, while the man outside started shouting and pulling at the door handle like he was trying to rip it off. That's around when my brother came to check on me. We could both hear the guy downstairs screaming now, slamming his fists against the door, cursing, kicking the walls. Then, out of nowhere, came the sound of shattering glass. He had grabbed one of the chairs from our front porch and thrown it straight through my parents' bedroom window. I remember hearing the crash and feeling like my heart stopped. I was convinced he was inside, and I honestly thought that was it, that he was going to kill my parents first and then come up the stairs after us. I don't remember much from that moment, other than crying and trying to listen for what was happening downstairs. Thankfully, that's when the police arrived. The flashing red and blue lights hit my window, and within seconds, I could hear officers shouting commands. They went inside, and soon after everything went quiet again. When it was over, we found out the man had climbed through the broken window, cutting himself badly on the glass. He crawled through my parents' room, down the hall, and into the living room, where he finally collapsed on the floor and just laid there, bleeding all over the carpet. He didn't have a gun or any other weapon. Apparently, he wasn't even trying to hurt anyone. The police guessed he was on drugs, hallucinating, and thought someone was chasing him. He was taken away in an ambulance, and we never saw him again. My dad cleaned up what he could before morning, and somehow, after all that, we went back to bed. The funny, or maybe terrible part came later, when we realized we'd forgotten to check on my little sister. Her bedroom was downstairs, in the back of the house. Nobody went to her after it happened, and nobody told her what was going on once it was over. She spent the entire night hiding under her blankets, convinced the guy was still inside. When we told her the next morning that it was all over, she was furious and scared out of her mind. We all apologized, of course, but to this day, she still brings it up every now and then. That night is one of those memories that never really leaves you. I still remember the sound of that first crash, the pounding on the door, and the way the air felt heavy with fear. It's been years, but every time I hear a sudden noise outside at night, my brain goes straight back to that moment, thinking someone's out there, trying to get in. I was about 12 years old when this happened, on Halloween night. My best friend and I had decided that instead of trick-or-treating that year, we were going to do what we thought was the cooler thing, egging houses. We hit a few, mostly random ones, and then went for the big target, my neighbor. She was the type of woman who yelled at kids for stepping on her grass, so when we noticed her back patio door was cracked open, we couldn't resist. A few eggs right into the kitchen, mission accomplished. We thought we were legends. As the night went on, though, the streets started to clear. Fewer and fewer kids were out trick-or-treating, and the air had that eerie quiet that only seems to happen late on Halloween. The decorations were still flickering on lawns, but the laughter and noise had faded away. That's when I told my friend I was ready to head home. But of course, he had other plans. He wanted to meet up with one of his buddies to keep the night going. I didn't like the idea. Something just felt off. But I didn't want to look like the scared one, so I agreed. His friend lived only a couple blocks away, but it felt longer. The streetlights were spaced out, leaving long stretches of shadow between them. Some of the bulbs were dim or flickering, and every time we passed through one of those dark patches, my stomach tightened a little more. To our left was an alley that looked like pure darkness. To our right, an empty road. It was dead quiet, just the two of us, and the sound of our shoes on the pavement. We were about halfway there when I heard the sound of tires screeching, a sharp, echoing noise that came from the road beside us. We both froze. My stomach sank, and when I turned, I saw this old, beat-up Ford pickup stopped in the middle of the street. The paint was faded, the body rusted, like it hadn't been washed or fixed in years. Two men got out. They were both wearing dark clothes and black ski masks, moving quickly toward us. The driver grinned, this wide, unnatural smile, and said, "What's up, fellas?" His voice was rough and scratchy, the kind that sounded like he'd spent his life smoking and shouting. He looked right at me, and I just stood there, completely frozen. My friend didn't waste a second. He grabbed my arm and yanked me back. "Run," he hissed. We took off toward the next street, cutting left and sprinting past houses, pounding on doors, yelling for help. Nobody answered. Every house was dark, and every porch we ran past felt like a dead end. My heart was slamming in my chest, and all I could think about was the sound of that truck's engine starting again. Sure enough, we heard it roar to life. Headlights flared behind us, and the truck came barreling down the street. I didn't think they'd actually try to hit us, but that's exactly what it looked like they were doing. We spotted a house across the street with its porch light still on. That one small detail that usually meant, we still have candy. To us, it meant something completely different. Someone's awake. Someone might help us. We sprinted across the street just as the truck sped past us, close enough that I could feel the air move. They missed us by seconds. We ran up to the porch and started pounding on the door, shouting for help. After what felt like forever, a woman opened the door, looking half confused, half alarmed. We were both trying to talk over each other, trying to explain that two men in masks were chasing us. She didn't waste any time. She let us inside, locked the door, and grabbed the phone. My friend called his dad while I stood by the window, watching the street. It was completely empty now. No truck, no men, no movement at all. Just silence. The woman came back into the room and told us her husband was a police officer. She'd already called him to let him know what happened. Hearing that was like feeling the weight lift off my chest. A few minutes later, my friend's dad pulled up, and we went outside to meet him. He dropped me off at home, and I told my parents everything. They called the police, and officers came by to ask questions, but I couldn't give them much. I was young, scared, and I barely remembered anything beyond those masks and that truck. We never heard anything back after that. No updates, no arrests, no word on who those men were or what they wanted. I never saw that truck again either. Looking back, it couldn't have lasted more than 3 minutes from the moment the truck stopped to when we reached that house, but at the time, It felt endless. Every second of it is burned into my memory, like a scene that'll never stop playing no matter how much time passes. This happened back in 2014, during my first year at university. It was Halloween night, and my friends and I had all gone out to one of the big student bars. I was dressed up, kind of lazily, wearing these high-heeled boots and a leather jacket. Nothing fancy, but it worked for a night out. A few drinks in, though, the boots started killing my feet. So at some point, I kicked them off and left them under the table where our group was sitting, figuring they'd be safe there. When the night wound down and the music was fading out, I'd actually danced myself nearly sober. I went back to grab my stuff, but our table was gone, and so were my boots and jacket. Someone had swiped them. I was annoyed, but not devastated. They weren't expensive, and honestly, I didn't wear them that often. The real problem was getting home. It was about a 15-minute walk back to my student accommodation, and I didn't have cash for a taxi. I asked this guy in our group, the one everyone kind of tolerated but didn't actually like, if he'd walk with me since he was tall and looked intimidating enough. He laughed, told me no, and walked off with another girl who'd also lost her shoes. So that was that. I was on my own, barefoot, trying not to step on glass as I made my way through the city center. It was still busy around the bars, people in costumes stumbling between clubs or heading home, but as I got farther from the main streets, things got quieter. I was about halfway back when this man stopped me. He looked to be Middle Eastern, probably in his 30s, and he asked if I was okay. At first, I was honestly grateful. It felt nice that someone noticed a barefoot girl alone at night and wanted to make sure I was all right. He introduced himself as Omar and offered to walk with me for a bit. I agreed, because he seemed harmless and friendly enough at first. As we walked, though, the tone started to shift. He was polite, but then he began complimenting me, telling me I was beautiful, saying how lucky he was to have run into me. It made me uncomfortable, but I tried to just laugh it off and keep walking. When we got close to my accommodation, maybe a minute away, I thanked him for walking with me and told him I'd be fine on my own from there. His whole expression changed instantly. "Don't you want to invite me in for a cup of tea to thank me?" he asked. I said no, and told him I didn't invite strangers into my place. That's when he grabbed my wrist. "Then maybe a kiss for helping you?" I told him no again, but his grip tightened. "What about a hug for your friend?" he said, forcing this weird smile. At that point, I just wanted him to let go, so I gave him this quick, awkward hug. But he didn't stop there. He pulled me closer and tried to kiss me. I turned my head and kept my mouth shut, and instead, he just licked the side of my face. I can still remember how disgusting it felt. Cold air, sweat, and this wave of panic as I shoved him off and started walking away as fast as I could. He followed. I sped up. So did he. That's when I started running. I stopped caring about glass or stones. I just ran. I didn't even look back until I pulled out my phone and called my friend Rob. My voice was shaking when I told him what happened and begged him to meet me outside my building. By the time I got there, Omar was gone, but Rob showed up a few minutes later, holding a kitchen knife, ready to scare off anyone who might have followed me. The next day, I told my group what happened, and they all felt awful for leaving me to walk alone. I didn't blame them, but I was shaken up enough that I went home for a week to clear my head. After that night, I made it a rule that no one in our group leaves anyone behind, no matter what. It's one of those things you don't really think about until something like that happens, and then you never forget it. Halloween has always been my favorite holiday. Still is, actually, even after what happened one year when I was 16. I guess that says something about how much I love it, because most people would probably feel differently after that night. Back then, I lived with my parents, my younger brother, my older stepbrother, and my cousin. We were all packed into this big old house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac not far from Main Street. The house had a huge backyard that led to an alley lined with old apartment buildings, and my bedroom was in the basement with a window that faced that yard. It wasn't a bad place to grow up. The town was small, mostly quiet, and even though the house creaked and groaned like it had a life of its own, I always felt safe there. A few days before Halloween, though, something a little strange happened. My stepbrother and cousin had come home one afternoon and found this old pickup truck parked out front. There were a few guys sitting in it, and they were taking pictures of our house. They said when the guys noticed them, they waved and started complimenting our Halloween decorations. Said it was one of the best setups they'd seen in town. The guys drove off after that, and we all kind of shrugged it off. It was weird, sure, but people sometimes stopped to take photos of our yard around Halloween. We went all out every year. Then Halloween night came, and that's when things started to really get strange. It was late, around 3 in the morning, when my stepbrother and cousin stumbled home from a night out drinking with their friends. My cousin got there first, but when he tried to unlock the door, his key wouldn't fit. He figured he was just too drunk to aim it right, so he sat down on the porch bench to wait for my stepbrother to catch up. About 30 minutes later, my stepbrother showed up, and the two of them laughed about it for a minute before he tried the door himself. Same thing. The key wouldn't even go into the lock. So, they called my mom. She was furious, of course, being woken up in the middle of the night because the drunk idiots, as she called them, couldn't work a key. But after some complaining, she finally went downstairs to let them in. When she tried her key, though, it wouldn't fit either. She got frustrated and decided to just deal with it in the morning, telling them all to go to bed. That part of the night I actually slept through. I'd gotten home a few hours earlier from a small Halloween party and crashed in my room downstairs. But around 1 in the morning, I woke up suddenly with this weird, tight feeling in my chest. That kind of unease you can't really explain. I laid there for a minute, telling myself I was just spooked from the night, maybe half dreaming still. But then I saw it. A shadow on my window. It was shaped like a person, standing perfectly still, the kind of thing your brain instantly recognizes even in dim light. My stomach dropped, and I froze. Then I reached over, turned on my lamp, and the shadow disappeared. I just stared for a while, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Or maybe someone was cutting through the alley behind the yard. That happened sometimes. It wasn't unusual enough to panic over, so eventually I rolled over and forced myself back to sleep. The next day after school, I came home to find police cars parked out front and a locksmith's van in the driveway. My parents were outside talking to both. I had no clue what was going on. Turns out, my mom had finally called the locksmith that morning to deal with the broken lock. When he started working on it, he found something jammed deep inside. When he pulled it out, it was the broken tip of a knife blade. That's when he called the police. While they were checking around the house, they noticed something else. 2 window screens had been slashed open. One was on the garage. The other was on my bedroom window. That was the moment everything from the night before suddenly made sense. The jammed lock, the shadow in my window, the guys taking pictures of our house days earlier. I think about that sometimes, how close someone must have been to actually getting inside while we were all sleeping. Halloween is still my favorite holiday, but every year when it rolls around, I make sure all the doors are locked and the windows are checked. Twice.